Okay, so I'm also currently testing why I have so many devices up. I hate WebEx. I think WebEx is horrible. So I'm trying to make a YouTube account for us where I'm going to live stream. So I'm currently testing a live stream. I tested it last time and there's something weird with it, which also randomly, some random person viewed our live stream. Don't know who it was, but they were watching. So I'm testing it right now and I think it's going to work. So that way, because I think WebEx is terrible, you'll be able to like chat and leave comments on a video if you have questions or something, and you can just easily do it through YouTube, not having to like log onto Canvas, watch a WebEx recording and all that. And you can pause and restart whenever you want. So I think it's going to work better, but it's actually way harder than I thought it was. So props to people who actually like YouTube live stream for a living. So I'm kind of doing it on this computer, I'm streaming on my laptop, and I'm watching it on my phone to make sure that it's working correctly. Okay, so I know this is a lot of material, and just the nature of this class is a lot of stuff. And normally in a non-COVID year, I would have a lot of like papers and activities for you guys to do, but I'm not supposed to do them because you guys aren't supposed to be like touching a lot of stuff that I've touched, or like normally I would hand out models and we would pass them all around. But we're not supposed to do that because of COVID. So it kind of stinks. So I know this isn't how I would like it to be, but it's kind of what we're stuck with. Okay, so did anybody have any issues with the quiz at all? Pretty easy, right? It's only like 5 questions, pretty simple. So good job on that. That's generally how my quizzes are going to be. I try to be straightforward. I don't like winding questions. Usually it's like, what is this? What is that? Okay, so we're going to move on from the kind of bony anatomy. So remember, if you need to review the bony anatomy, there is that extra credit assignment posted of the labeling. And after you do this as well, there is an ankle activity posted that you can do for points. You don't have to do it. If you choose not to do it, you won't get a 0. It will just be null. So it won't count for or against you. If you do the ankle activity, you can do it as many times as you want to get your highest score, but in the end, once it's due, I will go through and change all of the scores to 100%. But that doesn't mean, because I've had people do this before, they went on and answered one question and submitted it, so then they would get the 10, but I can see how long you took on it. So if you finish it in 30 seconds, I'm not going to give you the points. Okay. So we're moving on to the actual movements of the ankle and the muscles that cause the movements. So if we start out with our very first movement, is going to be dorsiflexion. So you hear the words a lot, flexion and extension. So dorsiflexion, if we look at an ankle right here, if we are going to dorsiflex it, we'll be kind of flexing our foot, moving our toes up. So this one obviously can do it really high. But if you were to take your own foot and point it up, kind of flex, give yourself a flat foot, that is going to be dorsiflexion. Where it has the degrees, like 15 to 20, you don't need to memorize those. So you'll never be tested on those kind of numbers. You just need to know what the movement is. So the true definition is going to be basically the top of your foot is moving towards your tibia. So this dorsum of your foot, which is the top, is moving up. So just think dorsiflexion is a flat foot. Versus the opposite, plantar flexion, we know plantar is the bottom of our foot, right? So this is going to be pointing our toe, which this one actually can't do very well. So pointing our toe, or if you look at your own foot, point your toe, which I can point my toe really far. So plantar flexion is the foot ankle is moving away from the tibia. So plantar flexion, the plantar aspect of your foot is going, versus dorsiflexion, the dorsum of your foot is coming. So pointing, you can also think P to P, plantar flexion, point. And again, you don't need to know the degrees. Okay, so also plantar and dorsiflexion, if you recall when I talked about the joints, do you remember subtalar and talocural joints in the ankle? So the talocural joint is what's occurring, well, what joint is moving with plantar flexion and dorsiflexion. You all right? Yeah. So plantar and dorsiflexion is occurring at that talocural joint, versus eversion and inversion is what's occurring at that subtalar joint. So eversion is going to be turning the ankle or your foot outward. So think pinky toe out. It's also kind of abduction away from the midline. So when this happens, it would be kind of rotating this way. So going out. So if you did it in your own ankle, you may not have very much, but it'd be bringing your pinky toe kind of up and out. Or if you have bendy ankles, you can kind of sit on the inside of your ankle to do eversion. So next is inversion. So opposite. Think in, it's turning in. So your big toe is turning in. You're kind of curling your foot under. That would be adduction, turning towards the midline. So that is going to be big toe in, so rotating that way. So if you took it with your own foot, it'd be turning in, so bringing my toe in, or inversion. So inversion and eversion is generally how you sprain your ankle as well. So usually inversion is the most common way to sprain your ankle. Most of the time people roll their ankle and sprain the outside. You can do the other direction, it's just not as common. Okay, any questions on ankle movements? So you got dorsiflexion, plantar flexion, which are opposites of each other, and inversion and eversion. Okay. The most important thing to remember as well is that those movements are reciprocals of each other. So if an ankle is in a position, or I'm asking you what the ankle is doing, don't pick both dorsiflexion and plantar flexion, because you can't have both. It's either in dorsiflexion or it's plantar flexion. Because I've had a lot of people on tests and quizzes, when I give you all of the options and you have to select, they pick the exact same movements that are opposites of each other. So something can't be inverted and everted. It's either inverted or it's everted. Okay. Pronation is a combination of quite a few movements. It's a combination of dorsiflexion, eversion, and forefoot abduction. Basically what that means is it's a postural thing. So if you've ever seen someone kind of stand, and I think I can force myself to do it, their ankle kind of just pops in like that. So see the difference between this one is up straight and then that one? That's pronation. So it's more of a postural thing. So you'll see a lot of people, or have you ever worn Uggs for a long time? And you looked at the bottom of your Uggs and the heel like was worn down like really crazy? Usually that happens, you'll see the inside will be worn down and the outside will be a lot thicker, or if you look at any shoes you wear a lot, that's because a lot of people walk pronated. They let their ankles sag all the way in, and so then they wear down the insides of their shoes. So when you got pronated ankles, your ankle is going to kind of pop in. Versus the other is going to be supinated. So it's a combination of plantar flexion and inversion. So this would be the opposite. Basically, the outside of your shoe would be worn down. These people kind of, I can't even do this one, they walk on the outside of their foot a little bit. So they kind of push over. Supination is called that because you make suples. So your foot would be kind of turning up and in, and you'd be walking on the outside of your foot. So you would see a worn down shoe pattern on the outside. But most of the time, and if you have any Uggs or any really soft sole shoes, go look at the bottoms and you'll see if you're a pronator or a supinator. Okay. And then the toes. Toes are pretty easy. So the toes can do flexion. So remember, basically anything with flexion is going to be kind of curling. So when you curl your toes, that's toe flexion. All of your toes can do it. So again, you don't need to memorize these degrees at all, because that's just too much knowledge for you. You just need to know that they curl. So your big toe can curl at both of its knuckles, and all your other little toes can curl at all of their knuckles. Maybe some people might have it so their pinkies can't really function, but usually you can curl all of your toes. So then the opposite is going to be toe extension. So spreading your toes straight. This would be kind of a hyperextension. So basically the toes are moving away from the plantar surface. And again, all of your toes, all of their joints can do toe extension. And you also do have abduction and adduction of your toes. I didn't really list it because we're not going to learn any of the muscles that do that. But you can spread your toes and you can pinch them together. Some people can do it much more than others. Okay, so this is the long part. So if you are not taking notes, you may want to take notes on this. So normally I would have you guys write I have a chart that I normally do for you guys. I'm going to see if I can figure out a way to do it because I think it's helpful because some people are choosing to not take notes at all. I don't think that's going to help you in the end. So we're going to group some of the muscles here. So this group are all plantar flexors. So all of these muscles listed all do plantar flexion. Some of them may be the primary mover of plantar flexion, and some may be a secondary mover. So we're going to go into each one of these, and we are going to list their origin, insertions, and actions, and that's what you'll have to memorize. So we have our gastrocnemius, our flexor digitorum longus, our flexor hallucis longus, our peroneus longus, peroneus brevis, plantaris, soleus, and tibialis posterior. So because of the sheer amount of material you have to learn in this class, you really need to take it in sections. So when you learn foot and ankle, you need to try to memorize all these now. If you wait to the end, it's not going to help you. And if you're just going to choose not to memorize any of it, you're really going to screw yourself over when you're most of you said you want to be a physical therapist. This is the stuff I actually use on the daily basis. So I use all of this daily. So if I didn't know any of this, there's no way you could become an athletic trainer or a physical therapist because this is the basics that you will build on for every other class you're ever going to take. So you do really need to try to memorize this the best you can, and that's what I recommend is truly just memorizing. Take it in small little pieces so that way by the end you're not overwhelmed. Okay, so the opposite of plantar flexors is going to be dorsiflexors. So we have quite a few less dorsiflexors. So we only have 4. So we have tibialis anterior, peroneus tertius, extensor digitorum longus, and extensor hallucis longus. So a lot of them you'll notice are actually very similar to the ones in the past one, just one word different. Okay. We have our group of everters, so they do eversion. Yes. Yeah, they're long words. And if you want to abbreviate, you can, but just make sure you know what your abbreviation stands for. So I know EDL and EHL stands for extensor digitorum longus and extensor hallucis longus. But if you wrote EDL on a test, you'd get it wrong. So you need to know what it means. But if you want it for your notes, you can abbreviate it. Good? So our everters that do eversion, do peroneus longus, peroneus brevis, peroneus tertius, so our 3 peroneals, which are a peroneal group, and our extensor digitorum longus again. we have our inverters. So tibialis anterior, tibialis posterior, flexor digitorum longus, so it can be abbreviated FDL, flexor hallucis longus, can be abbreviated FHL. So these do inversion. Okay, everybody all right for me to move on? Okay, so now we break these down. So starting with our gastrocnemius. So the OIA, O stands for origin, I stands for insertion, A stands for action. So origin, insertion, and action. So if we start off with our gastroc, that's what I abbreviate it to. So our gastrocnemius or our gastroc is your calf. So what you would classically think of, bless you, as your calf. So right here you can see B and C, both of them combined to be A. That is going to be your gastrocnemius. So we can look on this little guy. So we've got our two heads right here. So our gastroc right here. So that's your calf. So within our gastrocnemius, we have two heads. So you can see you have kind of two little separate teardrop shapes. You have a medial head and a lateral head. So big toe side will be the medial head. Pinky toe side will be the lateral head. So the origins of both the medial and lateral head are going to be the posterior surface, so the back, of the medial and lateral femoral condyles. So they're actually going to start way up on the thigh, where you haven't had to learn the bones yet. So that's called the femur. So medial head will go to medial femoral condyle. Lateral head will go to lateral femoral condyle. So they cross over your knee. So did any of you guys know that your calf muscle actually functions on your knee, not just your toes? So your gastroc not only functions on your ankle, bringing you up, it also bends your knee. So because it crosses a joint, it acts on that joint. So if it crosses the knee and the ankle, it means it acts on the knee and the ankle. So causing movement, that's what acts on means. So insertion is going to be posterior surface of the calcaneus. So what bone was the calcaneus? Your heel. So on here, we have our posterior surface of our calcaneus. So the actions, you'll see abbreviated. PF is plantar flexion. So feel free to write it in abbreviation if you want. And it also does knee flexion. So if you want, this is how I abbreviate. I was hoping this was a dry erase marker. So when I write flexion, I do a check mark. So a check mark means flexion. And extension is a straight kind of dash. So that can help you if you're handwriting your notes. You can just abbreviate it that way. So that'll help you go quicker. Which makes sense, right? Because flexion's got to bend, extension's straight. So your gastroc does both plantar flexion and knee flexion. So if you were going to work out your calves, what motion do you normally do? So plantar flexion, right? You guys do like calf raises. So most people you'll see will just go up on their toes and do plantar flexion. A lot of people don't really work out their calves by doing like knee flexion at all. That's usually because the main action is typically plantar flexion. That's where you feel it the most. So next is the soleus. So the soleus is going to combine with the gastrocnemius, and those two combine is what forms the Achilles tendon. So we have the same picture, so you can see we have our gastroc heads right here, B and C. Our soleus is deep to that. It's actually D, so you can kind of see it peeking out from behind. So it's much flatter and goes deep with beneath that gastroc. So it's this little area right here. So as well, if you look on this, you can hardly see him. He's kind of just poking out the side. So you got your gastroc sitting on top, so superficially, and then your soleus deep beneath it. But they gather together, so pinch together, to form your thick Achilles tendon. So that's what, if you feel the back of your ankle, you'll feel that kind of thick Achilles tendon. So the origin of the soleus is kind of general. It's just posterior tibia and fibula. So it's on the posterior side of both your tibia and your fibula. So kind of just here. And it has the same insertion site as the gastroc, posterior surface of the calcaneus, because it's going to gather together, form that Achilles tendon, and attach onto the calcaneus. So the soleus, unlike the gastroc, only crosses one joint, right? It only crosses the ankle, so it's only going to act on the ankle. So it only does plantar flexion. So soleus only does plantar flexion. So have you ever looked at people's calves? You might now. Usually the more you learn about anatomy, the more you people watch and just watch people, and then you realize, oh, their anatomy's messed up. Have you noticed some people's calves are like super prominent? You see like a really like bulbous top and then skinny kind of, or like my calves are much just kind of like the same length all the way down. They're kind of wide and just stay wide. That all depends on how high your gastroc rides. So if you have really prominent gastrocs, they might be really separated from your soleus, so you'll see people like with huge calves, versus like mine, also because I don't do calf raises, they kind of more blend together because our lower riding kind of blur with my soleus a bit more. So you'll notice that on some really buff people. It's fun to watch. Okay, plantaris, you don't need to know, so don't worry about it. It's an insignificant lame muscle that some people don't even have, so I don't see why you need to know it. Okay, next, we're going to go to our peroneal group. So the peroneals is a group of 3 muscles, so I'll often refer to them as the peroneals. So our first is peroneus longus. If you look in these pictures, you'll see it's called fibularis as well. A lot of textbooks interchange them. They can be peroneus longus or fibularis longus. Basically mean the same thing. I refer to them as peroneus longus because it's more common. But they kind of give you a tip of where they are. They're also called fibularis. So they originate, specifically the peroneus longus, on the lateral proximal fibula. So proximal is the top or the bottom of the fibula. Top. So the proximal, remember, is up towards the core. So you can see it's almost at the fibular head. So the very top aspect of the fibula. And what's called the interosseous membrane. So in between these two bones, so you see tibia, fibula, you see there's a little gap. I can stick my finger in. So in your body, you generally don't have any gaps like that. There's no spaces. So in between here is filled with this like thick spider web-like material, and it keeps those bones together. And that is your interosseous membrane. So you can see in this picture right here, you've got kind of that web-like structure as well. Okay. So it is going off of lateral proximal fibula, and as well as a bit of the interosseous membrane. So it is going to insert So you can follow it down. Follow this peroneus longus all the way down. You can see it turns into a tendon. It's going to go behind your lateral malleolus, so it travels behind. And it's going to insert onto the plantar surface, so the bottom of your foot, of the medial cuneiform and your first metatarsal. That's what this picture is of. That's of a view like this. So it's going to go down the side of your shin, behind that ankle bone that sticks out, your lateral malleolus. It's going to tuck under your foot and pop out on the other side, medial side. So it's going to come down, wrap around, go under your foot, and it's going to attach to your medial cuneiform and the first metatarsal. So it's making like a stirrup around your foot. So peroneus longus. So what's longus basically mean? What's the main word of this that you recognize? Long. So of the three peroneals, this is the longest of them all. Travels the longest distance. So the peroneals are generally going to be everters. So EV is eversion. They do eversion, bring your foot out. They do secondary plantar flexion. So if you remember at the very beginning I talked about kind of agonists and like synergists. These are those muscles that they do plantar flexion, but they're not the main ones that do it. So they help out, but if your gastroc and your soleus weren't there, your plantar flexion would be very weak, very limited. So main is eversion, but they also do plantar flexion. So we're definitely not going to get through all these today. That's okay. So peroneus brevis. Can anyone think of what this word brevis is similar to in like normal words? So brief, something short. So peroneus brevis is much shorter than peroneus longus. And you can actually see it peeking out from right underneath the fibularis longus. So it's going deep. Oh, I forgot to show you one here. So peroneus longus is going to be this one right here. So you can see him on the side, coming around, and he pops down, goes to the bottom of the foot. So peroneus brevis is going to be lateral distal fibula. So longus was proximal fibula, so it was up at the top. Brevis is distal, so it's down at the bottom. So it's going to be coming off of right here. So the bottom kind of half or aspect of that fibula. And lateral side, we know is the outside. It is going to follow the same path as the longest. It's going to go behind. It's hard, there are so many things in front of me. Behind that lateral malleolus. And it's going to insert on the base of your fifth metatarsal. So if we look at our pinky toe, kind of bulges out right here, it's going to attach right on the side. So we can see how your fifth kind of bulges out into that point? So that's right where your peroneus brevis is going to attach onto. So if you ever look on the outside of your foot, you'll see you have a little bulge on the outside. That's the base of your fifth metatarsal. And it has the same actions as peroneus longus. Eversion, secondary plantar flexion. So has anyone ever sprained their ankle, like rolled it in at all? Volleyball players would, right? Yeah. Have you ever had it where you sprain your ankle and you start getting pain all the way up in here? And your athletic trainer's probably like, yeah, you're fine. That's because those muscles do eversion, right? So when you roll your ankle this way, which, yeah, I know I can really bend my ankles. It's gross. When you do this, your muscles are trying to fight it. They don't want to do that. So when I go like this uncontrolled, all my peroneals are going to fire as hard as they can to bring me back into eversion because they don't want to do that. Sorry if you guys can't see that. So if I'm like this, these are all going to fire try to pull me back. But if I just landed, like if I landed from a block and landed on someone's foot and just rolled like this, which is what always happens, I can't control that. Those muscles are not going to be able to pull me out of that. So basically, they're going to pull as hard as they can, and they can't do anything. So they're going to be super sore afterwards because they just tried to yank as hard as they could and failed. So that's why you'll often feel that kind of pain going up the side, even though you didn't actually injure that. Don't ask me why my ankles are so bendy. I never sprained my ankle ever. So. Okay, peroneus tertius. So tertius, it's kind of a weird word, but I think of it as like kind of three. The images of the peroneus tertius are kind of lame because some people don't even have a peroneus tertius. It's kind of unnecessary, so some people don't even have it. So it is going to originate off of medial distal fibula. So even though your fibula is lateral, it can still come off the medial side. So basically that would just mean it's coming off of the inside aspect of that fibula. Distal, still the bottom. So it's going to come off medial distal fibula. It's going to insert to the same spot as the peroneus brevis, the base of the fifth metatarsal. But its action is going to be a little bit different. It does eversion, and it does secondary dorsiflexion. So the peroneus tertius is kind of the only one of the peroneals that doesn't do plantar flexion. It does dorsiflexion. Can anybody think of why it might do that instead, just by looking at its position? It's okay if you don't. So if you notice, the peroneus tertius kind of sits more anterior versus posterior. So generally, and there may be some differences to this, any muscle that's going to be on the back of your leg does plantar flexion. Any muscle on the front of your leg does dorsiflexion. So if you also get to a test and you have no idea what the muscle is, but you know it's on the front, just guess dorsiflexion. Because most likely it's going to do that. And there's a way to tell if you have a peroneus tertius, but a lot of people don't. Okay, so next muscle, we're going to do extensor digitorum longus. So this is another name that you can take apart and break down, and it can give you some clues to where it's at. So one, extensor, that's going to give you a clue to what it does, right? So we know it's going to extend something. Digitorum, have you ever heard of your digits? So your digits are your fingers and your toes. So people will say you have 10 digits, it means you have 10 fingers, 10 toes. So we know extensor digitorum is going to be extending our toes. And longus is just, it's a long muscle. So the origin of the extensor digitorum longus has a couple of spots. So first, the lateral condyle of the tibia. So we know this bone is going to be the tibia, right? Medial shin bone. The lateral condyle of the tibia, so see up at the top how it kind of spreads out, kind of bows. This bump is going to be the lateral condyle. So we know it's on the lateral side because the fibula is on the lateral side. Pinky toe is on the lateral side. So this bump right here is lateral condyle of the fibula, or tibia, sorry. This would be medial condyle of the tibia, the other side. So it's coming off of that lateral condyle of the tibia, as well as the head of the fibula, which is the very top. You can kind of see kind of this little shape, head of the fibula. So it's basically coming from right here, where my two fingers are at. It also is going to attach on the interosseous membrane, so that webbing going in between. So extensor digitorum longus is going to insert onto the top, so the top of the foot, of the distal phalanxes, so the tips of all of the toes, 2 through 5. So not your big toe. So extensor digitorum, and every digitorum muscle, is only going to 2 through 5, not the big toe. So it's going to do extension of toes 2 through 5, and it's on the front right, and it's crossing the ankle, so it's going to do dorsiflexion. So extensor digitorum does extension of toes 2 through 5 and dorsiflexion. Any questions on that, or do you need some more time to write? Okay. Hopefully it looks like our YouTube Live is actually going to turn out this time. It didn't last time. We'll see if any randos watched. It's kind of creepy. Okay, I just wonder, like, if you saw that on YouTube, you're just like, yeah, I'll watch. Like, that's weird. Okay, extensor hallucis longus. I will do this as our last muscle because I know I covered a lot. So extensor hallucis longus. So extensor, we know, is referring to extension. Hallucis refers to your big toe. So your big toe, if you want to be fancy, is called your hallux. So oftentimes you will see, maybe in injuries, or if you look at like maybe packaging for things, your hallux is the anatomical word for your big toe. Your pollux is your thumb. So hallux is your big toe. So this is coming off of the origin site, is going to be medial surface of the anterior fibula. So see why I wanted you to learn the anatomical directions. So medial surface of the fibula, inside aspect of the fibula, anterior, the front. So it's going to be coming off of kind of the inner front aspect of the fibula. So you can see it kind of pointing right there. It is going to come down, cross over the front of your ankle, and go and insert onto the top of the distal phalanx of the big toe. So it goes all the way to the tip of the big toe. It does extension of all the joints of the big toe. It does dorsiflexion because it's on the front. And it's also going to do inversion. So have you ever looked at your feet and you saw the kind of like tendinous cords running on the top if you move your toes around? Like if you have really skinny feet? Those are all your extensor digitorum tendons and your extensor hallucis longus. So like if you look at my hand and I kind of move my fingers, you can see my tendons pop up there. So you would see the same thing with your toes. So those are all your tendons. Okay. So we can see on here. So anything that is red is muscle. Anything that is white is generally tendon. So we can see we have our extensor digitorum longus. So running down the front, and then you can see it spread off into little sections to go to each of the toes. Sometimes the easiest way, if you can't figure out just by looking at these which one it is, find the spot you do know, so you know it's going to be this, and trace it back up, and then you'll be able to find it. But your extensor hallucis longus is deep. So it's actually this little sliver right in here. I'll move around. So that little sliver in there is that extensor hallucis longus, and we know that because we can trace it down to the big toe. Ooh. That was close. Oh. So right in there, little sliver, going down the big toe. You guys see it? You want me to put back there? Sliver, big toe. Okay. All right. And if you notice that my hands are purple, they are. They got dyed. Okay. You are done, because that's all I want to do for you today. We do have more to go through, but if this YouTube Live turns out, which I think it did, I will post our YouTube channel on here, and you can subscribe to it, and then you'll be able to watch them. One sec. Let me end the stream.